The gates of Buckingham Palace gleamed under the grey London sky, calm and silent, as if nothing inside them had changed. But that silence was deceptive. Behind those walls, whispers carried like thunder, because something had happened, something that many royal watchers had dreamed about and others had warned against. Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, had quietly been making moves to return to the royal fold. Not for fame, not for the cameras, but for redemption, or so it seemed. And just when the path back appeared open, one person, his own brother, shut it forever. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The call came from Kensington Palace. It wasn't loud. It wasn't public. But it was final. Prince William, heir to the throne, the man groomed for the crown, made a decision that would alter the monarchy's story for years to come. He didn't just reject his brother's proposal to return as a part-time working royal. He reassigned every one of his intended duties to another man. Sir Timothy Lawrence, the husband of Princess Anne, a man most people never thought of as central to royal life. But in that moment, he became the quiet symbol of what the monarchy now valued most: stability, loyalty, and silence. It all began with a simple question whispered in palace corridors. Could Prince Harry ever come back? That question had haunted the royal institution since the day Harry and Meghan stepped away in 2020. For years, public opinion swayed like the tide. Some believed time would heal everything. Others insisted the bridges had already burned to ashes. Yet, recent months had seen a shift. Harry had shown up at select events, spoken warmly about family, and even hinted at reconciliation. For the first time in years, the thought of a royal reunion didn't sound like fantasy. But there was a catch, one that no one outside the palace walls could yet see. As King Charles's health became a quiet concern, whispers of transition began. The monarchy needed strength, consistency, and a future-proof image. The institution couldn't afford another scandal or public drama. And that's when Prince William started seeing things differently, not as a brother, but as the next king. The story that follows isn't about brotherly rivalry. It's about power, image, control, and the painful cost of loyalty in a family where love and duty rarely coexist. So, what really happened behind closed doors? According to insiders, Harry's request was simple. He wanted to serve. He proposed taking on a limited number of royal duties, charity events, veteran outreach, and select Commonwealth appearances. Nothing political, nothing controversial. He believed it would help repair the rift. The palace's initial reaction was reportedly cautious but not dismissive. Some courtiers saw it as an opportunity, a PR win that could soften the family's image. For a brief moment, there was hope. But hope, in the royal world, is fragile. Because every decision comes down to one brutal question: how will it look? Behind the scenes, William was already managing the monarchy's delicate public balance. He had taken on dozens of engagements, solidified Catherine's role as the public's sweetheart, and become the face of the new, responsible monarchy. To him, bringing Harry back wasn't just risky, it was chaos waiting to happen. One misstep, one headline, and years of reputation building could collapse overnight. And if sources close to the brothers are to be believed, that's when the call was made. Not from King Charles, not from the courtiers, from William himself. The message was clear. Harry's return would not happen. It was more than a rejection. It was a recalibration of power. Because William didn't just deny Harry's proposal. He reassigned every one of his intended roles to someone else. Sir Timothy Lawrence, the quiet, composed husband of Princess Anne, a man the Queen had once described as reliable beyond measure. Sir Timothy was no stranger to responsibility. A decorated naval officer, disciplined and unbothered by fame, he had spent years working behind the scenes, loyal, humble, and discreet. Everything Harry was not in the eyes of the royal machine. So when William made his decision, it wasn't random. It was symbolic. It was William saying, without saying it, that duty belongs to those who never question it. Imagine for a moment what it must have felt like in Montecito. Thousands of miles away, Harry believed he was finally being heard. He thought reconciliation was within reach. He had even prepared drafts of new projects, focusing on veterans, mental health, and global youth initiatives. Meghan, ever the strategist, was already framing their return as a victory of forgiveness and unity. They thought the palace would welcome them back. Instead, an envelope arrived, not from the king's hand, but on his letterhead. Courteous, cold, final. The letter expressed gratitude for Harry's ongoing charitable efforts. It praised his passion, but in the final paragraph, it made something painfully clear. At this time, there are no openings within the structure of royal duties. Beneath those words, one signature stood out. Not Charles's, not Camilla's, William's. In that moment, the message was undeniable. Harry wasn't coming back. And worse, he'd already been replaced. But why Sir Timothy? Why elevate a man who'd always lived in princess and shadow into such a crucial position? That's where the story turns from personal to political. Insiders say William had been quietly forming his own inner circle of trusted allies. Not flashy PR handlers or Hollywood advisors, but veterans, ex-diplomats, and old guard courtiers. Men like Timothy. They represented everything William wanted the monarchy to project in this new era. Stoic, loyal, traditional, apolitical. In many ways, Sir Timothy became the anti-Harry, a living example of what royal service used to mean. And yet, there was something deeper here, something emotional. For years, William had carried the burden of being the responsible brother. He watched Harry make emotional decisions, public outbursts, and explosive interviews that shook the royal image. Every time Harry spoke out, it wasn't just a family scandal. It was a headline that questioned the crown's future. William had forgiven, defended, and waited. But when the chance for Harry's return came, he saw it not as healing, but as history repeating itself. And this time, he wouldn't let it happen. Still, the decision didn't come without cost. Behind the grandeur of official statements, there were private heartbreaks. King Charles, according to royal aides, had mixed feelings. As a father, he longed for peace between his sons. But as a monarch, he understood the necessity of order. Queen Camilla, pragmatic as ever, reportedly sided with William. The firm must come first. That phrase, the firm must come first, echoed through palace hallways like a sentence from another century. Outside, the public remained divided. Some celebrated William's firmness, calling it leadership. Others saw cruelty, a coldness unbecoming of Diana's sons. But few knew the full truth. This wasn't a spontaneous act. The groundwork for Harry's rejection had been laid months earlier, through quiet briefings, carefully worded press leaks, and subtle repositioning of palace figures. The operation to restructure royal duties was already underway before Harry ever reached out. Sir Timothy's name began to appear more often in court circulars. His presence at key engagements increased. Analysts noticed that the kind of events once handled by Harry, military commemorations, environmental initiatives, youth leadership programs, were now under Timothy's oversight. It was a silent substitution, invisible to most but unmistakable to those paying attention. And as William consolidated control, one thing became clear. There would be no room for uncertainty, no space for emotion. Not in this monarchy. It's easy to frame this as a simple act of betrayal, a brother turning against a brother. But perhaps it was more complex. William wasn't just rejecting Harry. He was rejecting the chaos that followed him. The monarchy had endured decades of tabloid storms, divorces, and media wars. William's goal was survival. And in survival, sentiment rarely wins. Still, in Montecito, the emotional fallout was seismic. Friends of the Sussexes described Harry as stunned and deflated. Meghan, on the other hand, reportedly saw it coming. "They were never going to let you back," she allegedly told him, her tone somewhere between anger and vindication. Yet, for Harry, it wasn't just a professional setback. It was a personal one. He had hoped his father's illness and his own maturity would bridge the gap. Instead, the message was unmistakable. The family had moved on. The public didn't see the midnight phone calls, the tearful arguments, or the long silences between brothers who once shared everything. They saw headlines, photos, and carefully staged smiles. But underneath it all, the wound widened. William, determined to protect the crown. Harry, determined to find meaning outside it. Both sons of a mother who once dreamed they'd change the monarchy together. The irony was painful. The late Princess Diana had always wanted her sons to humanize the royal family, to make it warmer, more accessible. Yet, decades later, her dream was weaponized. Harry tried to do it his way, through emotion, honesty, and rebellion. William did it through structure, duty, and modern reform. Both carried her spirit, but only one could carry her legacy within the walls of the palace. And so, the institution made its choice. By the time news broke publicly, it was no longer framed as Harry's rejection. Instead, royal briefings painted it as a strategic reallocation of responsibilities. The words were clean, corporate, bloodless. No mention of conflict. No mention of pain. Just a quiet reshuffling of titles and duties. The public barely blinked. But for Harry, that administrative phrase felt like exile all over again. Meanwhile, Sir Timothy continued his new assignments with quiet precision. He didn't seek attention, didn't issue statements. His calm professionalism made him a perfect shield for William, a living symbol that the monarchy had no time for theatrics, only continuity. And that's when speculation began. Was this just about replacing Harry's work, or replacing Harry himself in the royal narrative? Because make no mistake, the monarchy is not just a family. It's a story, and William, for the first time, was rewriting it. The question that remains is chilling. Was this about leadership or revenge? Because some insiders whisper that William's decision wasn't entirely strategic. They claim it was personal, deeply personal, that years of humiliation, interviews, and public betrayal had hardened him. That when the chance came to decide Harry's fate, William didn't hesitate. And perhaps, for the first time, he didn't feel guilty about it. Yet others close to him insist the opposite, that this was never about emotion. That William's heart still aches for the brother he once knew, but his mind knows the monarchy must come first. And in that split, between heart and duty, William became something his mother feared most, a true king in waiting. So, as the palace moves forward, Sir Timothy's name grows more respected, Harry's role grows fainter, and the brothers' bond grows colder. What once was a story of reconciliation is now one of replacement. And beneath the grandeur of royal tradition, a silent truth hums. The institution always wins. But if you think that's where the story ends, think again. Because the real shock came later. Not from the palace, not from the press, but from a secret letter that suggested this plan to sideline Harry wasn't new at all. It had been in motion long before anyone realized. And the person behind it might not have been William. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The rain had just begun to fall over Los Angeles when the first call came in. It wasn't from a royal aide or a friend at the palace. It was from a reporter. Prince Harry might be heading back, the headline teased. Just a few words, but they hit like a thunderclap. After years of estrangement, lawsuits, interviews, and endless speculation, could it be true? Could the prodigal son really be returning home? The world wanted to believe it. Even those who'd long criticized Harry for abandoning the crown couldn't deny that the thought of his return was electrifying. Redemption, reconciliation, a royal comeback for the ages. But what the world didn't know, what no one outside that tight royal circle could have guessed, was that this so-called return had already been buried before it even began. It started months earlier, quietly, behind layers of secrecy. According to palace insiders, Harry had begun reaching out through intermediaries, private secretaries, old military contacts, even a retired aide once close to King Charles. His proposal was modest, almost humble. He didn't want titles restored or estates returned. He wanted a role, something official, something meaningful. He reportedly offered to take on a part-time, working arrangement, splitting his time between the UK and the US, attending select royal events, representing the monarchy and causes close to his heart. It wasn't a demand. It was an olive branch, a peace offering wrapped in formality. After all, Harry still cared deeply about veterans, mental health, and Commonwealth youth programs. These were his passions long before Netflix deals and tell-all memoirs. At first, there was cautious optimism. Some senior staff members reportedly felt Harry's idea had merit. The monarchy had been struggling with an aging workforce. King Charles's health meant a gradual delegation of duties. And despite public controversies, Harry still had global recognition and influence that few other royals could match. Reintegrating him, if handled carefully, could have been a PR masterstroke. But palace optimism never lasts long. As soon as the idea reached Prince William's private office, everything changed. The heir's advisors, many of whom had worked with him since his university days, viewed Harry's return as a direct threat. not just to William's authority, but to the institution's stability. "We can't reopen old wounds," one reportedly said during a meeting at Kensington Palace. "The public trusts William and Catherine. That's where the focus must stay." It wasn't just about optics. It was about control. To understand why William reacted the way he did, you have to go back to those early post-Megxit days. When Harry and Meghan left, it wasn't simply a family falling out. It was a structural crisis. The monarchy relies on hierarchy, order, and predictability. Harry's sudden independence shattered that illusion. Every interview he gave, every accusation he made, wasn't just gossip. It was a direct challenge to the crown's moral authority. William, who had been raised to protect that image, never forgot how vulnerable it made them look. So when whispers of a return surfaced, they didn't sound like reconciliation to him. They sounded like chaos. And chaos had no place in the new monarchy he was building. At first, William stayed silent. He didn't respond to Harry's informal outreach, didn't return calls, didn't make public comments. But behind the scenes, he started moving pieces. Quietly, strategically, meetings were held with senior courtiers. Longtime staffers reviewed the list of royal patronages once associated with the Duke of Sussex. And somewhere in that process, one name started appearing again and again: Sir Timothy Lawrence. Sir Timothy had always been the quiet strength behind Princess Anne. While and commanded public respect for her discipline and work ethic, Timothy was her stabilizing shadow, unseen, unwavering, utterly dependable. He wasn't royal by birth, but his reputation for duty and discretion made him indispensable. In many ways, he was everything Harry used to be: committed, honorable, uncomplaining. And so the decision began to take shape. Rather than reinstating Harry, the palace would reassign his former roles permanently. That way, the family could project unity without reopening the wounds of betrayal. But no one told Harry. Unaware of the brewing strategy, Harry continued his quiet outreach. Friends said he was nervous but hopeful. He thought this could be a turning point, one California insider later revealed. Meghan, ever cautious, wasn't convinced. She reportedly warned him that the palace would never forgive him for going public. But Harry believed time heals all wounds. He believed his father would listen. Then came a moment of hope, or what seemed like one. A meeting request. A short email from Clarence House, suggesting a private audience could be arranged when Harry next visited the UK. No formal agenda, no guarantees, just a meeting. Harry accepted immediately. When the day came, he arrived at Clarence House under the radar. No photographers, no fanfare. The meeting, however, was brief. Too brief. Charles, frail but courteous, spoke of duty, legacy, and public trust. He didn't promise anything, but didn't dismiss Harry outright either. It was the kind of royal conversation that seemed warm until you realized nothing had been said at all. Still, Harry left encouraged. "It's a start," he told a friend. He genuinely believed that the walls were beginning to crack. But what he didn't know was that those very walls had already been rebuilt, thicker, higher, and reinforced by William's resolve. Within days of that meeting, William made his move. He summoned senior advisors and finalized the reassignment plan. It would be presented as part of a broader restructuring of royal duties, streamlining engagements, and reinforcing the monarchy's forward-facing image. The public reason? Efficiency. The private truth? Erasure. By the time Harry learned what had happened, it was already official. Royal appointments that once had his name were now listed under Sir Timothy Lawrence. The Invictus-related patronages, the Commonwealth youth organizations, even select environmental initiatives, gone. At first, Harry thought it was a mistake. He reached out through official channels, then unofficial ones. Calls went unanswered. Emails, unreturned. Then came a curt response from a palace aide. "Decisions have been finalized." Imagine the heartbreak in that moment. The humiliation. The realization that he hadn't just been excluded, he'd been replaced. And yet, even as he processed the shock, the world around him moved on as if nothing had changed. Newspapers hailed Sir Timothy's expanded duties as a sensible, stabilizing move. Commentators praised William's maturity and foresight. The message was clear: the monarchy no longer needed the spare. But what hurt most wasn't the public narrative. It was the silence from his family. Charles said nothing. William said nothing. Not even Anne, whom Harry had always respected, reached out. It was as if the entire institution had agreed to collectively erase his existence. In Montecito, Meghan's frustration boiled over. Reports claim she urged Harry to go public again, to expose what they're doing. But Harry resisted. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about heartbreak. He'd tried to make peace, and instead, he'd been written out of the story completely. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the palace machine was already crafting the next chapter. The focus shifted toward unity. William, Catherine, and Timothy as the new royal core. It was sleek, reliable, uncontroversial. The contrast to Harry's past chaos couldn't have been sharper. Still, something about the speed and precision of the restructuring raised eyebrows among royal watchers. It was too coordinated, too deliberate. Almost as if the plan had been in place long before Harry even asked to return. Which leads to the real question. Did William ever intend to let him back? Or was the offer of reconciliation just a mirage, a palace illusion designed to test public reaction? If that's the case, then Harry wasn't rejected. He was outmaneuvered. The irony was cruel. For years, he'd accused the firm of operating like a business rather than a family. And now, they'd proved him right, treating his life like a boardroom restructuring, one that replaced emotion with efficiency. But beneath the institution's polished calm, cracks were beginning to show. Not everyone agreed with William's strategy. Some older courtiers quietly questioned whether replacing Harry outright would alienate younger generations. Others feared it might deepen the very wounds they were trying to close. Even the king, it said, expressed private sorrow. Yet, no one dared to challenge the heir. William had become the de facto power in the palace, steady, unyielding, determined to project control. And anyone who questioned that control risked being frozen out. In the end, Harry's attempt to return wasn't just denied. It was erased from history before it ever began. But as the public applauded William's decisive leadership, something unexpected began brewing behind the palace walls. Because not everyone believed Sir Timothy's rise was William's idea. There were whispers, soft, dangerous whispers, that another hand had guided the move. Someone even William wouldn't defy. And if those whispers were true, then this wasn't merely a story about one brother blocking another. It was about a much older plan, a quiet operation that began long before Megxit. A plan meant to protect the crown at any cost, even if it meant turning brother against brother. Because somewhere inside the palace archives, hidden among old letters and sealed documents, lies proof that this power play didn't start in 2025. It started years ago, during the final months of Queen Elizabeth's reign. And the person who set it in motion wasn't William. But what came next would reveal just how far the monarchy had gone to keep control, and just how little either brother truly understood the game they were playing. It arrived on a Thursday morning, folded neatly inside a cream envelope stamped with a red royal seal. To anyone else, it would have seemed like a simple formality, dignified, ceremonial, expected. But to Prince Harry, that envelope carried the weight of everything he'd been waiting for. It was the letter that would tell him whether the door to his family, his heritage, had truly reopened. The California sunlight filtered softly through the windows of the Montecito mansion. Meghan stood by the kitchen counter, phone in hand, while Harry sat at the long wooden table, staring at the envelope as though it were alive. Neither spoke for several moments. The silence was heavy, almost reverent. "Are you going to open it?" Meghan finally asked, her tone somewhere between impatience and disbelief. Harry didn't answer. He turned the envelope over in his hands, studying the handwriting. It was precise, formal, the kind of penmanship that belonged to an aide trained under decades of royal protocol. But something about it felt cold, distant, mechanical. He tore it open. The letter began with pleasantries, warm enough to sound human, yet detached enough to feel impersonal. It thanked him for his continued commitment to public service and for his tireless work supporting veterans and mental health awareness. It acknowledged his passion, his devotion to the causes closest to his heart. Then it shifted. The tone changed, almost imperceptibly, but unmistakably. It said, after careful consideration, and in consultation with senior members of the household, His Majesty has determined that there are currently no formal openings within the framework of active royal duties. Harry's eyes stopped moving. He reread the sentence once, twice, 3 times. It wasn't the words themselves that hurt, it was their precision, their finality. No formal openings. That wasn't rejection. That was exile, politely phrased. Meghan took the paper from his hands, scanning it quickly. Her expression hardened. "This isn't your father's voice," she said quietly. "This is William's." Harry didn't respond. He didn't have to. Deep down, he knew she was right. What came next was worse. The closing paragraph listed several upcoming royal initiatives: military patronages, mental health programs, environmental campaigns, the very kinds of engagements Harry had hoped to rejoin. Only now, they were assigned to someone else. A man whose name had barely registered in Harry's life before this moment. Sir Timothy Lawrence has graciously agreed to assume leadership in these areas on behalf of His Majesty. The words blurred for a moment. Harry's jaw tightened. "Sir Timothy?" he whispered. Meghan frowned. "Anne's husband." He nodded slowly, the realization cutting deep. This wasn't random. It was deliberate. It was as though the palace had chosen the quietest, safest, most uncontroversial man possible, the anti-Harry, to inherit his world. "He's dependable," Harry said bitterly. "That's what they'll say. Dependable. Controlled. Perfect." Meghan folded the letter and placed it on the table like something contaminated. "You know what this is, don't you?" she said. "They're erasing you. Piece by piece." Harry said nothing. His gaze drifted toward the window, where the California sun looked nothing like the gray skies of London. For the first time, he felt like he was on another planet. Not just another continent. Later that afternoon, he stepped out into the garden, phone in hand. The letter's words echoed in his mind as he scrolled through old messages, numbers from aides, former friends, even his father's private secretary. He stopped at one name: Sir Clive Alderton, King Charles's right-hand man. For years, Sir Clive had been the gatekeeper of communication between the king and the rest of the family. Harry typed a message. "Received correspondence from Clarence House. Need clarification. Was this from my father directly?" He hesitated before pressing send. Then he did it anyway. The message showed as delivered. Hours passed. No reply. By evening, Meghan came out to find him sitting alone by the pool, phone still in hand. "No response?" she asked softly. He shook his head. "None." "Then you have your answer." That night, the silence between them said more than words ever could. Harry had faced rejection before, but this was different. This wasn't the tabloids. This wasn't the public. This was blood. Family. His father's house. And in one letter, they had made it clear he no longer belonged. The next morning, the story began to spread. First, a small mention in the Times. Then, a headline in the Telegraph. "Prince William steps up. Sir Timothy Lawrence to oversee key royal programs." The narrative was perfectly crafted. No mention of Harry's offer to return. No mention of conflict or rejection. Just a seamless transition. A show of unity, continuity, and quiet efficiency. To the public, it looked like business as usual. But behind the scenes, the truth was colder. William had orchestrated it. Not impulsively, not emotionally, but strategically. Every part of the letter, from its tone to its timing, had been designed to make the move seem procedural, professional, final, and most importantly, inevitable. A royal source later told one journalist, William didn't want drama. He wanted closure. But closure, as Harry would soon realize, often comes disguised as punishment. Days later, in Montecito, Harry received another message, this time from an old friend inside the palace. The message was brief. It wasn't just William. Ask who drafted the letter. He stared at those words, uneasy. What did that mean? Who drafted the letter? He assumed it had come from William's office, maybe with input from King Charles's aides. But the phrasing, in consultation with senior members of the household, nagged at him. It was too careful, too legal, too deliberate. Then came the rumor. A former royal staffer confided to a journalist that the letter wasn't just written by an aide. It had been approved by multiple departments, including those linked directly to the King's press office. It was a coordinated effort, the source claimed. And it wasn't done to hurt Harry personally. It was done to protect the institution from him. Protect the institution. That phrase haunted him. For years, he had been accused of attacking the institution, the invisible machinery that operated above the family. But now, he realized it wasn't just an abstract concept. It was real, and it was alive. The letter from Clarence House was proof of that machinery at work. Every word had been chosen not to communicate, but to control. Even Meghan, who had grown accustomed to palace games, found this level of precision chilling. "It's like a legal notice," she said one night, rereading it for the 10th time. "They're not talking to you as a son. They're talking to you as a liability." Harry laughed bitterly. "A liability? That's generous." He looked down at the table where the letter still sat, perfectly folded, untouched since that first day. Part of him wanted to burn it. Another part wanted to frame it as evidence. And yet, beneath the anger, there was something else. Something he didn't want to admit out loud. Hurt. Because despite everything, the interviews, the documentaries, the lawsuits, he had still hoped his family would see him. Truly see him. Not as a problem to solve, not as a PR risk, but as their son, their brother, their blood. Instead, they'd given him a letter. Across the Atlantic, things were moving fast. Sir Timothy's new assignments were announced publicly, complete with polished photos and quotes about duty and service. His quiet demeanor made him an instant media favorite. Commentators praised his humility. "He's the kind of man the monarchy needs," one royal biographer said. Unassuming, dedicated, loyal. Every word of that praise felt like a blade. Meanwhile, in the royal offices, William's advisors celebrated the smooth execution of their plan. No leaks, no backlash, no chaos. It had been done perfectly, efficiently, cleanly. But not everyone inside the palace was comfortable. Some aides whispered that the letter was unnecessarily harsh, that it could have been worded differently, that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't the king's true intent. And that's where things get murky. Because as one insider later revealed, there was a second draft, a softer version. It had been written by Charles's personal secretary, gentler in tone, more emotional, almost fatherly. But that draft never left Clarence's house. It was intercepted, edited, and replaced before the king ever saw the final version. So the question becomes, who changed it? Those close to William claim it wasn't him directly, that the final edits came from senior staff who anticipated the king's wishes. But others insist William not only saw the final version, but personally approved it. And then there's a third theory, that someone else entirely influenced the letter's content. Someone who had been guiding royal communications for years, and who believed Harry's return could destabilize everything the monarchy had rebuilt since the Queen's passing. That person's name, insiders say, would shock even those who think they know how the palace works. But that revelation, the real author behind Harry's rejection, would not surface until later. For now, all Harry had was a letter, a broken heart, and a single unanswered message to his father's office. He folded the letter again, placed it in a drawer, and tried to move on. But he couldn't. Every time he saw a royal headline, every time a British reporter mentioned Sir Timothy's name, he felt the same burning question echo in his mind. Why him? What was it about Sir Timothy that made him the chosen one? The man fit to wear Harry's responsibilities like a new uniform. Because this wasn't just coincidence. It wasn't convenience. It was something much deeper. Something that tied back to the final months of Queen Elizabeth's reign, when she had made a decision that no one outside her inner circle ever knew about. A decision that, years later, would come back to haunt both her grandsons. And as Harry would soon learn, that decision was about to be exposed. But what came next would turn that single letter into a symbol of something far darker. Proof that his rejection wasn't an isolated act, but part of a much bigger plan. A plan that started not with William, but with the Queen herself. The corridors of Kensington Palace had always whispered with secrets, but in the weeks following Harry's attempted return, the whispers became a roar. Meetings were held behind closed doors, not for the press, not for the public, but for the few who truly understood the stakes. Prince William, the future king, was no longer merely acting as a brother. He was acting as the architect of the monarchy's next era. And those who worked alongside him weren't just courtiers or aides. They were strategists, planners, and loyal operatives handpicked to execute a vision that few outside the palace could comprehend. The first thing to understand about William's approach is this. He viewed the monarchy not as a family drama, but as a living institution, fragile and yet powerful, balanced on tradition and public perception. Every move had to serve a purpose. Every decision had to protect the crown. And after years of Harry's unpredictability, every risk had to be eliminated. It wasn't personal, or maybe it was. The line between familial affection and institutional duty had blurred long ago. Insiders say William carried with him a quiet resentment, the kind that builds up over decades of watching a younger sibling take risks, speak out, and shake the very foundation you've been tasked to protect. And now, with the possibility of Harry returning, William faced a choice: allow emotion to dictate policy or execute a plan that would safeguard the monarchy, even if it meant alienating his own brother. The plan began with a series of carefully orchestrated alliances within the palace. William's first step was to identify key advisors who were both loyal to him and aligned with his vision. They were the architects of his strategy, and together, they formed a network designed to outmaneuver anyone who threatened the monarchy's stability. There was Sir Edward Young, the long-serving private secretary to the sovereign. His reputation for discretion was unparalleled. He had seen every crisis, every scandal, and every misstep of the family over decades. Sir Edward's role was simple: ensure the machinery of the palace ran without leaks, without drama, and without public exposure of internal conflict. Then came Catherine's inner circle. Kate, the Duchess of Cambridge, had always been more than a supportive wife. She was a quiet force, intuitive and politically aware. Her influence over William was subtle, almost invisible, yet profoundly effective. Advisors reported that her suggestions often determined which initiatives would move forward, which speeches would resonate with the public, and even which images would be released to the press. In essence, she was the monarch's image strategist in the shadows, her fingerprints invisible but unmistakable. Next, William enlisted a cohort of old guard courtiers and military advisors. They were men and women who understood hierarchy, duty, and the delicate dance of public perception. Their primary responsibility was to manage the logistics of royal duties, but their secondary and far more critical task was to reinforce William's authority. Every time Harry's name appeared in a suggestion for engagement or initiative, this circle would immediately evaluate risk, optics, and potential fallout. If it threatened the monarchy's stability, it was removed or reassigned. It was during this period that the first real decisions about Harry's return were made. The palace quietly reviewed every engagement Harry had performed in the past, every public statement, every charitable initiative he had attempted to carry forward. Each one was scrutinized not just for relevance, but for symbolism. Was it too close to William's domain? Could it draw attention away from the heir? Would it reintroduce chaos to the monarchy? If the answer was yes, William's team acted. And act they did. Slowly, quietly, they began to reassign duties, first in planning documents, then in official press releases, and finally, in Clarence House correspondence. Every action was designed to be smooth, deliberate, and above reproach. From the outside, it looked like standard operational protocol. From the inside, it was a full-scale strategic maneuver to remove Harry from the picture without public confrontation. The most significant piece of this alliance, however, was Sir Timothy Lawrence. William understood that Harry's absence needed a visible, reliable figure. Someone who could take the Duke's former responsibilities and carry them forward without question, without personality, and without drama. Sir Timothy, with his decades of service and reputation for steadfastness, was perfect. He was the antithesis of Harry, methodical, calm, and above all, loyal to the crown rather than personal ambition. By elevating him, William achieved multiple goals. He replaced Harry's functional role, projected continuity, and reinforced the image of a monarchy that valued service over spectacle. It wasn't just about replacement. It was about control. Every program, every engagement, every initiative Harry had once championed was now under Sir Timothy's oversight. Veterans outreach? Timothy handled it. Commonwealth youth programs? Timothy handled it. Environmental campaigns? Timothy handled it. The monarchy's machinery had been recalibrated to ensure that Harry, no matter his intentions, could no longer influence the narrative. And yet, William's alliance extended beyond personnel. It encompassed information control. Every rumor, every potential leak, every possible angle for public scrutiny was monitored. The royal communications team operated in shifts, ensuring that no statement could emerge without pre-approval. Even casual anecdotes from staff were vetted for potential impact. William was building a fortress of information, a palace within the palace, designed to protect the monarchy from the unpredictability he associated with his younger brother. By now, insiders say, William's strategy was as much psychological as it was operational. Harry had been conditioned to believe that reconciliation was possible. His hope, his optimism, his belief that familial bonds might overcome institutional logic. All of it would become irrelevant once the palace implemented its plan. Every letter, every email, every meeting request was calibrated to reinforce a single truth. The monarchy had moved forward, and Harry was not part of its current trajectory. Even Catherine played a role in this subtle orchestration. Publicly, she remained warm, approachable, and engaged, attending events and supporting initiatives that highlighted William's leadership. Privately, she counseled him on optics, media strategy, and public sentiment. The Duchess's influence was silent but formidable. She ensured that William's decisions would be interpreted as deliberate and principled, rather than personal or vindictive. At the heart of this alliance was a core philosophy. Loyalty to the institution always supersedes loyalty to family. William's team understood that the monarchy was bigger than any one individual, bigger than scandal, bigger than personal feelings. And that understanding shaped every decision. Yet, as perfect as the strategy seemed, there were cracks beneath the surface. Not everyone within the palace agreed with William's methods. Some courtiers whispered that Harry's exclusion risked alienating the public, particularly younger generations who had grown attached to the Duke's candidness and global appeal. Others feared that sidelining him entirely could create a new wave of media scrutiny that even Sir Timothy's calm demeanor could not contain. And still, William pressed on. He met with advisors, one by one, each conversation meticulously documented. Every objection was addressed, every alternative considered, every risk mitigated. By the time the letter to Harry was drafted, the alliance had effectively sealed the plan. It wasn't simply a rejection of Harry. It was a systemic removal of his potential influence. To the world, the plan appeared seamless. Sir Timothy was presented as a stabilizing figure, the monarchy as steady and unwavering. The public narrative celebrated efficiency, duty, and continuity. But behind the polished veneer, a quieter, more personal story was unfolding. William, in choosing his allies and executing this plan, had made a choice about his brother that would reverberate for decades. He had decided that Harry's return was not just inconvenient, it was unacceptable. And in that decision lay the heart of the drama. Because as carefully as the palace had orchestrated everything, as methodically as William had aligned his allies, the truth was that Harry still existed. He still had influence. He still had friends, supporters, and a global audience watching every move. And somewhere, in the shadow of this carefully built alliance, a question lingered. Could Harry find a way back, despite everything? Because even the best-laid plans, as the palace would soon learn, are never foolproof. The alliance had secured a temporary victory. Harry had been denied, replaced, and sidelined. Sir Timothy was now the face of the monarchy's key initiatives, and William's control over the institution had never been more solid. But the battle for narrative, for influence, and for personal vindication was far from over. And that's when the leaks began. Just subtle at first, rumors in the press, curious questions from journalists, murmurs from unnamed insiders. But soon, the palace would realize that even a strategic alliance built on decades of loyalty could not fully contain the storm. Because in the end, the monarchy might control the institution, but it cannot control human emotion. And Harry's story was far from finished. The question now was simple. Who would move first, the palace or Harry? And what came next would shock the world, redefine public perception, and reveal just how much power William had truly amassed. Few people in the world of royal circles had ever paid much attention to Sir Timothy Lawrence. Unlike the flamboyant headlines that followed Harry and Meghan wherever they went, Timothy existed in quiet shadows, moving with precision, discretion, and an almost invisible influence. For most, he was merely Princess Anne's husband, the naval officer whose name appeared occasionally in press photos. But behind the closed doors of the palace, his reputation was formidable, and now, in the aftermath of William's decision, the world would finally see why. Timothy's story began long before any royal crisis or media frenzy. A decorated naval officer, he had dedicated decades to service. His life was structured, disciplined, and deliberately private. Unlike other royals who often became public figures by birthright, Timothy carved his role through action, reliability, and unwavering loyalty. He wasn't flashy, he wasn't particularly photogenic, and he had no appetite for celebrity. But those traits, the very qualities that made him unremarkable to the public, made him invaluable to William and the monarchy. To understand the decision to elevate him over Harry, you first have to understand Timothy's position within the palace. While Anne often took the limelight for her environmental campaigns, charitable work, and disciplined approach to public engagements, Timothy was the anchor behind her success. He managed schedules, oversaw logistics, advised on sensitive decisions, and, crucially, handled conflicts without creating a ripple in the public eye. Where Harry might react emotionally or publicly to slights, Timothy acted quietly, methodically, and effectively. In many ways, Timothy was the embodiment of everything the monarchy now valued above all else: stability, discretion, and control. And William, who had spent years watching his younger brother's impulsive tendencies, recognized a kindred spirit in Timothy. Not only was Timothy competent, but he understood the silent rules of power that governed the palace, rules that Harry, despite his good intentions, repeatedly ignored. William's choice was both strategic and symbolic. Assigning Timothy to oversee the duties Harry had hoped to resume sent a clear message. The monarchy prioritized reliability over emotion, duty over familial sentiment. Timothy became the living proof that the institution could function smoothly without the unpredictability of a rebellious heir. But Timothy's rise didn't happen overnight. For years, he had quietly established trust with key palace figures, including King Charles. The monarch admired Timothy's discretion, his ability to execute difficult tasks without attracting attention, and his unwavering support for Anne's charitable work. Unlike Harry, whose passion sometimes manifested in public conflicts or media statements, Timothy operated like a skilled engineer behind a vast and complex machine. His loyalty wasn't performative, it was operational. This reputation made him the perfect candidate for William's plan. By reassigning Harry's proposed engagements to Timothy, William wasn't just filling a role, he was redefining the hierarchy. Harry's absence would no longer be a gap. It would be a deliberate choice reinforced by the presence of a figure whose calm authority overshadowed any need for dramatic interventions. Palace insiders later revealed that the first conversations about Timothy assuming these new responsibilities began quietly, months before Harry even expressed interest in returning. In private briefings, William's advisors discussed the benefits of Timothy's involvement. "He is disciplined," one aide reportedly said. "He understands duty, and he doesn't need the spotlight. That makes him perfect for this transition." It was a calculated move. William knew that while Harry had influence and charisma, he also carried baggage, public feuds, media controversies, and the narrative of rebellion. Timothy, by contrast, was untouchable. He had no scandals, no personal vendettas, no history of public outbursts. To the monarchy, he represented the ideal balance of competence and invisibility. The decision was finalized with meticulous planning. Timothy's schedule was gradually adjusted to incorporate engagements that Harry might have handled. Military commemorations, charity events, and environmental programs were quietly reassigned. Official statements framed these changes as part of a broader effort to strengthen the monarchy's outreach and ensure continuity of service. No one outside the palace noticed the deliberate replacement, but insiders understood the significance. Harry had been removed from the equation entirely. Publicly, Timothy's rise was understated, almost imperceptible. Media coverage described him as assisting with royal duties alongside Princess Anne, or supporting key charitable initiatives. The subtlety was intentional. William's team knew that any overt announcement could provoke backlash or fan speculation about internal family conflicts. By keeping Timothy's ascent low profile, they avoided drawing attention while simultaneously consolidating control. Meanwhile, inside the palace, Timothy's role extended beyond formal duties. He became a trusted advisor to William and Catherine, offering guidance on operational decisions and public engagement strategies. His insight was valued not just for its practicality, but for its reliability. Timothy had the rare ability to navigate the complex dynamics of the royal family without creating personal conflicts or attracting undue attention, a skill that Harry, for all his charm and good intentions, struggled with. Timothy's rise also served a symbolic purpose. By elevating someone so measured, so unassuming, William reinforced the message that loyalty and discipline were more important than drama or emotional appeal. In one quiet stroke, the monarchy had reasserted its priorities. The institution would survive, and those who served it best would be rewarded, regardless of familial relationships or personal charisma. For Harry, the realization was devastating. The man he had once viewed as a quiet figure in Anne's shadow was now stepping into the very responsibilities he had hoped to reclaim. And the symbolic weight of that shift could not be understated. Where Harry's approach had always been passionate, public, and sometimes unpredictable, Timothy's methodical, disciplined presence underscored the monarchy's preference for order over emotion. It wasn't just a reassignment of duties, it was a declaration. The monarchy had made its choice. Harry's proposed return was no longer possible, not because of incompetence, not because of lack of desire, but because the institution had decided that stability and loyalty outweighed sentiment and public spectacle. Even as Timothy assumed these new roles, he remained characteristically discreet. He did not issue statements, seek attention, or comment on Harry's exclusion. His calm professionalism contrasted sharply with the media storm that surrounded the Sussexes. Public admiration for Timothy grew subtly, quietly reinforcing William's strategy. He was not a rival. He was a stabilizing force, a living testament to the monarchy's enduring structure. But not everyone inside the palace viewed Timothy's rise as entirely positive. Some aides expressed concern that Harry's absence could leave a gap in public perception, especially among younger audiences who admired his candidness and global influence. Others worried that the Sussexes' media presence might continue to challenge the monarchy's image, despite Timothy's silent stewardship. William, however, remained unwavering. His strategic alliance had accomplished its goal. Timothy was in place, Harry was sidelined, and the monarchy projected the image of a seamless, stable institution. And yet, as calm and controlled as the public facade appeared, the underlying tension between brothers and between the monarchy and the media was far from resolved. Because while Timothy had risen, Harry had not been defeated. His audience was global, his platform undeniable, and his story still unfolding. Timothy's presence, carefully curated as the antidote to Harry's unpredictability, would soon face tests William could not have foreseen. And the quiet man who now stood as the monarchy's stabilizing force might ultimately be the key to uncovering the palace's deeper secrets, secrets that had been hidden for decades. As the world adjusted to Timothy's new responsibilities, one question lingered in every palace corridor and every royal household discussion. Could anyone, even someone as disciplined and loyal as Sir Timothy, fully replace Harry? And what came next would reveal not only Timothy's true significance, but also the depths of William's strategy, and just how far the palace would go to control the destiny of its youngest and most controversial prince. It was barely past noon when the call came. The soft trill of the palace phone echoed through the quiet halls of Kensington, a sound that often meant little more than a scheduling inquiry or a note about an upcoming engagement. But this time, it carried a weight that would reverberate far beyond the walls of William's office. The staff outside the door knew immediately that the heir to the throne was focused. He picked up, straightened his tie, and listened intently. His jaw was tight, his brow furrowed. Every line of his posture communicated the seriousness of the moment. No one spoke. In the world of royals, silence is often more important than words. And for those brief minutes, the corridors themselves seemed to hold their breath. On the other end was Sir Edward Young, William's longtime private secretary. He rarely made calls like this, but when he did, the matter was critical. The message was short, clinical, and precise. Harry's proposals for returning as a working royal had been reviewed, evaluated, and denied. Not only denied, but reassigned. Every one of Harry's intended engagements would be handled by someone else. Someone already trusted. Someone reliable. William's lips pressed into a thin line. The man on the other end of the line had expected some discussion, perhaps a few minutes of negotiation. But William's mind had already made up the decision. There was no room for debate. The monarchy, he believed, demanded certainty, not sentiment. And so it was decided. Sir Timothy Lawrence would assume the roles Harry had hoped to reclaim. The significance of this reassignment cannot be overstated. Harry had built a reputation for his charitable work, his public engagement, and his passion for issues ranging from veteran support to environmental conservation. He had cultivated relationships, attended functions, and carved a niche that, in the eyes of the public, made him an essential member of the royal family. Now, in the span of a single phone call, those roles were transferred. The decision wasn't just about logistics. It was about signaling authority. By elevating Sir Timothy, William made a statement that was unmistakable. The monarchy prioritized stability, discretion, and loyalty above all else. Harry's previous contributions, impressive as they were, no longer mattered in the public narrative. Timothy, calm, composed, and wholly dependable, was the new face of those responsibilities. After the call, William leaned back in his chair, eyes closed. He wasn't celebrating. He wasn't vindictive. He was calculating. Every decision had been deliberate, each move a part of a larger strategy. William understood that he was not merely managing roles. He was controlling perception. The palace, the public, the press, even his own family's understanding of events. All would see order, continuity, and measured judgment. Meanwhile, miles away in Montecito, Harry remained unaware. He had prepared, rehearsed, and strategized. He had envisioned the moment he might return, hoping for a cautious reconciliation. But while he imagined a warm conversation with his father, what was unfolding was a silent reassignment of power, a redefinition of his place within the monarchy. The call from Kensington represented more than an administrative decision. It was a turning point. It marked the moment when William stepped fully into his role as protector of the crown, a role that required hard choices, even when those choices hurt those closest to him. And while the call itself was brief, its consequences would ripple across the Atlantic, altering relationships, careers, and the public's perception of the royal family. Inside the palace, the call triggered a flurry of quiet activity. Advisors began drafting statements, reassigning schedules, and preparing briefings for key members of the household. The precision of these actions underscored the magnitude of the decision. Harry's return was not only denied, it was erased from the operational plans of the monarchy. Sir Timothy, for his part, was informed of the new responsibilities with characteristic composure. There was no gloating, no display of power. He accepted the roles quietly, understanding their significance but not seeking the spotlight. His professionalism provided a stark contrast to the emotional turbulence that surrounded Harry's sidelining. Publicly, the reassignment was framed as a routine operational adjustment, part of an effort to streamline royal duties and ensure continuity in representation. The official narrative emphasized stability, efficiency, and the careful planning of the monarchy's activities. The choice of Sir Timothy, presented in this manner, seemed natural, almost inevitable. Privately, however, the decision carried a deeper resonance. William's circle understood that this was more than a reassignment. It was a calculated move to prevent Harry's return from destabilizing the monarchy. The choice of Timothy ensured that every engagement, every charitable initiative, every public appearance was in the hands of someone utterly loyal, entirely predictable, and wholly aligned with the heir's vision for the future. At the same time, the decision had emotional consequences that could not be ignored. Harry, now officially blocked, faced a reality that no one had prepared him for. His efforts to reintegrate into the family were not merely rebuffed, they were replaced. And for the first time in years, he was forced to confront the possibility that reconciliation might never be possible. The call from Kensington, brief as it was, set in motion a chain of events that would reshape relationships within the royal family. It crystallized the divide between the heirs, highlighted the growing importance of allies like Sir Timothy, and underscored the unyielding nature of William's authority. Even within the palace, some aides and advisors recognized the delicate balance being maintained. While the operational benefits were clear, the human costs were undeniable. By sidelining Harry, the monarchy risked alienating a significant segment of public opinion, particularly among those who admired his candidness, his advocacy, and his global reach. Yet, William remained resolute. The long-term vision of a stable, orderly monarchy outweighed immediate public sentiment or personal emotion. The call was final. The roles were reassigned. And Sir Timothy Lawrence had stepped into a position of unprecedented influence, quietly ensuring that the Crown's public duties continued without disruption. And so, as the call ended and the palace returned to its usual rhythm, a quiet tension lingered in the air. The machinery of the monarchy had moved with precision, but the emotional and political ramifications of the decision were only beginning to unfold. For Harry, the reality of the call had yet to arrive. But when it did, it would mark not just a personal disappointment, but a pivotal moment in the evolving story of the British monarchy. Because the consequences of this single call were far-reaching, touching not only familial relationships but also public perception, media narratives, and the very structure of royal authority. And as William leaned back in his chair, considering the next steps, one thought remained inescapable. Even the smallest decision, made with precision and intent, can alter the course of history. But what came next, what Harry would discover in the days and weeks following this call, would reveal just how meticulously the palace had orchestrated his exclusion. And that revelation would shock the public, challenge expectations, and redefine what it meant to be part of the royal family. The sun was beginning to dip toward the horizon over Montecito, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns of the Sussex estate. Inside, the air was thick with tension, electric and nearly tangible.